Well, God's blessings to you. So about a year and a half ago, we did, as you may have seen on YouTube, we did a comprehensive look at my Christian theology book library. And so I'm not going to go over the entire library again, but I am going to revise the video to include some of the key additions that we have made to the library. And like I said, that was about a year and a half ago that we went through it. And I felt that it was really important just to highlight some of these great volumes that have been added to the library. So this one has been added to our systematic theology shelf. And a lot of people don't know this name. Some do in the world of Reformed seminaries. Richard Gaffin Jr. He was actually a student of Voss. He kind of comes from the Gerhard Voss discipleship tree, I would say, along with a few others, most notably John Murray. But what we want to say about this is just an incredible volume, long awaited. The title is Word and Spirit by Richard Gaffin Jr. The seminary that Richard Gaffin Jr. attended and later taught at was Westminster. But what's so great about this volume, and as you can see, it's a massive volume, is it's a collection basically of many of his articles and that he had written and published in journals, various journals, through the decades that were previously unpublished in book form and only in those journals. So this is being presented for the first time in a systematic theology book, and there's a great emphasis. This is what I love about this book. Great emphasis on the historical and redemptive aspect of theology. That's really the foundation of theology. When you're talking about theology, particularly biblical theology, and that's the other thing I wanted to say. This is really somewhat of a unique systematic theology because it's kind of a hybrid of biblical theology and systematic theology, and Gaffin was well-versed in both and taught both. So the redemptive and historical perspective is definitely brought forth, and a great emphasis on Christology. Okay, so now this, of course, is a much more familiar work, and the Institutes. Now, we already highlighted the Institutes, Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, in the last video, but this I thought was pretty cool to pick up. This is an early edition of it that Erdman's put out back in the 1950s, two-volume set, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, someone may be able to correct me here, I believe this is the Battles translation of Calvin. Now, this one over here is a much more readable or accessible copy from Banner that White put out. White was the translator, and that's a more easier read. The translation is much more lucid. But this, just for historical purposes and for collecting purposes, is a wonderful thing to have on the shelf. Calvin's set that came out from Erdman's from the late 50s, early 60s. Okay, so moving on here. I wanted to highlight this one. Now, this is from Dabney, another more familiar work, and it's actually a 3-volume set, but I only have volume 3. I'll be getting the other 2 soon to make it a complete set. I bought this book. I purchased this book because Phil Johnson talked so highly of it. Phil Johnson, the executive director of Grace to You Ministries, and he thought it was the most valuable thing in his collection from a theological point of view, just from an edifying point of view. So I went ahead and got it, and I started it, and I've just started it, and boy, he is so right. Dabney does not pull punches. A little history behind Dabney. There's a thick political realm to his ministry. because he was a professor during the Civil War. And so some people are very critical of Dabney due to his takes on slavery. He was not of the immediacy realm of mind, in which immediacy being that the slaves were to immediately be released. But don't let that stop you from reading him. He does an excellent critique of Romanism. Oops, sorry about the camera there. Romanism and paganism and the papacy, and he does not pull punches. I found myself almost wanting to put the book down and start clapping and start applauding. And that's just one volume, so I'm looking forward to getting. I would highly recommend. This one is a little bit harder to find because it is out of print, but if you can find it in a secondhand store or online, grab the whole set. Grab all 3 volumes. You will not regret it. Okay, so wanted to cover that one. Another new edition, a little bit rare, not a new edition, but a old book that we have added to the library from Warfield to go into the Warfield shelf is Biblical Foundations. Why did I want this one? By the way, this is another very difficult book to find. I found it down in Australia as an import. Hard to find just because it's been out of print for so long. And what I really love about this one is the foreword is written by the great Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, the doctor. And then it's basically a collection of his writings. So it's an extension of his other work, that the selected shorter writings. It's basically just an add-on to that. You will find some of the same material in the Biblical Foundations book collection, but not a lot. There's not a lot of crossover. But Warfield, man, what can you say about him? Just fantastic. His emphasis on on Christ, and his emphasis on the supernaturalism that exists within biblical history, and of course his defense of Scripture and how Scripture is inspired. So, and that was really what he wrote the most about, of course, in this book here, the person and work of Christ. Some other books we wanted to highlight that we have added. I did have a kind of I would say a reading copy, a small little paperback, kind of flimsy little paperback of Christianity and Liberalism from Machen. But this is really nice to have because this is an early edition of it. One of the, again, Erdman's did such a fantastic job of publishing some of those early works, and so it's really kind of a shelf copy here, but I suppose if I ever decide to reread it, which I probably will, and if you haven't read this classic, oh my goodness, you are missing something else, because I think when I had the paperback, I've got the paperback laying upstairs, I think I ended up highlighting maybe 70% of what Machen had to say, because he has such a spectacular attack on what modernism did to Christianity in the early 20th century. We're talking 1905 through about 1930. Bad time for orthodoxy, because modernism and liberalism just invaded the seminaries, and that was a real problem for Reformed theology. People often ask, why was Calvinism and Reformed theology, why was that lying so dormant in, the 1920s all the way through the 70s? What was the issue there? Well, modernism. And, the criticism of the supernatural aspect of Christ and the incarnation really played a big hand in that. And so it wasn't until the resurgence of the Reformation and yeah, I would say that's a good word for it. The resurgence of the Reformation in the 1990s with John Piper and R.C. Sproul and MacArthur. It wasn't until then that Calvinism really began to take off once again and get back to its roots after lying dormant for so many decades there in the early decades of the 20th century. Okay, going down here, this is a book that if you are Reformed, absolutely get this book. It's the most comprehensive treatment of Reformed theology, but not only that, it is a strong, strong defense of Orthodox Christianity, and it exposes Pelagianism for what it is. It exposes Arminianism for what it is, junk theology. John Gill, you talk about not pulling punches. John Gill, the great reformer John Gill, and his classic work, The Cause of God and Truth. Highly, highly recommend it. You could get this copy, I believe, Sovereign Grace Publishers. I think that's the name of the publisher. Pretty easy to get online. But again, not the typical book you're going to find in a bookstore. You have to go online to find this. And I just started this book. It's one of those books that is it reminds me of The Christian in Complete Armor by William Gurnall, because it is so prolific, and it's a long read, but if you just chip away at it, similar to Charnock, if you just chip away at it, you'll find it incredibly edifying. A book that you'll read throughout your whole life. If you ever want, speaking of comprehensive, if you ever want a really, really strong defense of predestination, the doctrine of predestination, and there are some nuances between predestination and election, get John Calvin's book called Calvin's Calvinism. And it was one of the many series of books that Erdman's put out by Calvin. As you can see, there's a few others. I only have a small sample size of that set, but there's probably all of Calvin's commentaries come in this set from Erdman's. They put that out in the early to mid 50s. And if you can get that, what a wonderful thing to have in your library. Again, these editions are a little harder to find just because they are out of print and they are so old, over 60 years old. But getting back to this book, this Defense of Predestination, this is so good. I mean, anybody who doesn't believe in predestination will be floored by this, because if you don't walk away with a grasp and an understanding of how biblical predestination is, by looking through Ephesians 1 and looking through John 6, looking through Romans 8, and particularly Romans 9, then I would just say that you're blinded by the truth. The veil is covering your face. One other great thing about this is Calvin will distinguish the difference between predestination and election. A lot of people just lump those two together, and there is some crossover. But predestination is slightly different from election, in that election is basically dealing strictly with soteriology, whereas predestination is the all-encompassing counsel of God's will. Everything, my old quote that I always used to say, and I still say it, everything happens for a divine reason, just to put it very simply. So yeah, great book, Calvin's Calvinism. Pick that one up. Now this one I wanted to highlight. This is a classic, and believe it or not, I had never heard of it until my pastor quoted the author and the book in one of his sermons. And I thought, I've always wanted just a really lengthy, front to back, A to Z look at the Messiah's life. And from the birth to the incarnation, the incarnation and the birth, to his younger years, to his ministry, which only lasted 3 years, to his death and resurrection. It's believed that he was in his early 30s when he died on the cross, and his resurrection, the atonement, all of that, and his post-resurrection appearances, you name it, it's all covered in this. The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. Another massive, massive volume. But these types of books, you're not going to be able to get them finished in a year, even if you read them a page every day. But don't let that intimidate you. I found that if you just chip away and read 1 or 2 pages a week, the book will eventually, you'll chip away at it, you'll complete it. So take your time with it. It's to me, it's almost like fellowship with Jesus. It is a historical account. So this particular copy has both volumes in one. It's an older copy by Alfred Edersheim. Alfred Edersheim. Now, that's not a name that rings a lot of bells in today's world, but it certainly did back in the 60s, and it is a classic. So, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, Alfred Edersheim. I'd recommend that one. One additional book that I picked up from Louis Berkhof is Principles of Biblical Interpretation. So I put this in the hermeneutics section because this is such an excellent addition to hermeneutics. And now some people find Berkhof somewhat of a dry read. And I could see why people would think that. I understand that, but at the same time, because he wrote a lot of textbooks, and a lot of people who actually this was in the curriculum for a lot of students in seminary. But if you're really looking for a walkthrough of the main principles of hermeneutics just being an understanding of the correct interpretation of Scripture, then Berkhof does a great job with it. But there's many authors you can choose from on hermeneutics. Now I wanted to kind of do a quick highlight of Cornelius Van Til. I have become a big admirer of Cornelius Van Til. His old books that were put out on hardcover by the Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing Company, they are very, very hard to find. They are extremely rare. So I was pretty excited when I found these two. And Van Til, as we shift now from hermeneutics to apologetics, Van Til's specialty, for anyone who is familiar with Cornelius Van Til, is apologetics. And what I consider to be his greatest work of apologetics is the defense of the faith. And it's a page turner. It really is. If you're interested in apologetics, and Sproul, as you can see, this is my apologetics section. But I really consider Van Til to be the main guy to read for apologetics. Now he also writes a little bit of Christian philosophy. And I've learned, not to just throw out all Christian philosophy, because there is some good Christian philosophy out there. Again, it takes a discerning eye when you are reading Christian philosophy. So this was another hard cover by him, and I'm pretty sure you can get these, in newer published versions in paperback. But again, as a collector, not only a reader of theology, but a collector of theology books and old theology books, I wanted to find the classic hardcovers of Van Til. Very, very hard finds. But if you're interested in reading these, again, you can find them. And The Case for Calvinism by Van Til, another book of apologetics. Now going over to my favorite theologian of all time, Arthur Pink. And the Arthur Pink collection has really grown. There are, and again, I'm not just a book collector. I read every single one of these books, but I was thrilled to find a copy of the first book that he ever published, and this was with his original publisher, the Bible Truth Depot, and Henderine, I believe that I'm pronouncing that correctly, was his first publisher. When Henderine went out of business, Ravel was his second publisher, and Ravel published a lot of his early works before some of his later publishers, after he passed away, took over. But this was his first book. Now, this is really old. I believe this is, I have to check, but I think it's in 1913 or 1917, something like that. His first book published, The Divine Inspiration of the Bible by Arthur Pink. And the second oldest Pink book I own came out right after that, The Redeemer's Return. And again, these are very, very difficult books to find because they are, how do I pronounce it, Antiquarian type of books. So if you can find an Antiquarian bookseller, which I know of a couple, I got these two from a very nice widow in Pennsylvania who sells her father's books to help support her children. And she has a house full of great antique books in antique theology, and those were two that I had purchased from her. I purchased quite a few from her, including this one. This is a very old copy of his exposition on the Gospel of John, volume 1 of a 3-volume set. Now, if you want to get those all together, you can do that as well. As you can see, I believe, Zondervan published them all together in one volume. And John is such an incredible, incredible gospel, isn't it? Here's an older copy of the exposition of the Sermon on the Mount. We added that just because of its authenticity, or its antique nature. And there's newer versions of that as well. So I believe that's all we wanted to talk about today. So those are kind of the additions to the bookshelf. And if you enjoyed this video, you can take a look at a couple of the other videos I put up that go through the entire library. But that takes, you can chip away watching that. There's a video that lasts about an hour for that. So, God's blessings to you. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments section. And as always, God's blessings to you.